Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tulsa World Opinion video podcast. I'm Jenny Graham, the editorials editor.
I'm Bob Bissett, editorial writer and columnist.
And it's been a weird week. And it started last week. The weeks just sort of blend in, but what sort of started last week and kind of bled over, which is led into our theme, which we didn't mean it to be a theme for this weekend, is mental health. And the Tulsa County District Attorney, Steve Kunzweiler, was stabbed multiple times by his daughter on September 27th, I believe. And the next day, he came out and gave a press conference, and I watched it, and it was really powerful. And so this weekend, for our editorial, we are running a transcript of that, or at least the heart of it, because he spent at least 3 minutes of that time thanking very specific people, which I think anyone that faces a really difficult time like that, you want to call out all those who came to you. But when I was watching it, the things that kind of stuck out to me, and it was to the board as well, was it's brave to speak about something like that. I mean, this is clearly a family struggle, and he spoke very strongly about seeing how the state has eroded our mental health system. And when you think about it, if a prominent district attorney in the state cannot access and get the right kind of mental health services for his daughter, then how does that bode for everybody else? And one of the things he said a couple of times was that when he started as a prosecutor 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago at this point, the mental health services were better than they are now. That's saying something. What struck you when you were reading his statement or listening to that statement?
I could definitely tell, you could feel a palpable bit of righteous anger in this thing, keyed on exactly what you're talking about. That when he started this thing, I mean, it's not like everyone was thinking, oh yeah, we got Cadillac mental health services in Oklahoma back in the 90s. But the fact that we've gone downhill from there, that the legislature could have by now, over many, many sessions, done something to improve this and just hasn't. And then for him, it all came home to roost in his own household. And what he's telling you is, we got one of them check engine lights come on a few years back when the state labor commissioner was killed by his son. And the words he used, crickets. That's pretty damning.
Yeah, I remember when that happened, and everybody in the legislature was shocked, horrified, we're going to do something. And he's right, nothing is done. There's a lot of talk about supporting mental health, but when it gets down to it, there hasn't been a lot of action on it.
No.
And so we're running that, and in writing and reading that and writing out the transcript, it inspired me to think of, well, what could they do? Because it just seems so big. But there are some things that I point out in a column this weekend that they could do right now. And one of the things we've spoken about quite often is the legislature's absolute refusal to follow the law that the voters passed 6 years ago in State Question 780 and 781 that changed some of the classifications of drug offenses to misdemeanors. The whole idea was to reduce the prison population for nonviolent offenders, but then take that savings, since we're not sending people to prison, and then put it to the county governments and let them just distribute it to the mental health programs that it needs in the communities. The idea was the needs are going to vary from county to county. So some far-flung county might have problems with isolated elderly people who are suffering from depression, or maybe they've got a bad meth problem going on. Whereas in Tulsa County, we're seeing a homeless population explode. We're seeing juvenile mental health, suicide rates skyrocket. So the idea is the local communities know best, but they've spent nothing. The legislature has expended no money to satisfy that part of the law. And it's really frustrating that it's
Yeah,
been
what do
6
they,
years.
what do they owe now? Like 50 million?
Well, I looked it up a year ago. It was almost exactly a year ago. I wrote a story where they were owed, the county governments were owed $50 million a year ago. So we're just, I mean, at some point, they're going to have to pay up. And we've got $3 billion in savings accounts.
Exactly. The money's there. We just need to do it.
Yeah. And so that's starters there. But then you kind of go down the list of things, but there's still a stigma. And that's a part of it too, is I think the more people speak about the frustrations they have in accessing therapy, because right now, if you're not in crisis, it's hard to get therapy. It's hard to get just like regular services. So that's where we are. So in there is parity in workforce and all these other things. But to me, right now, the legislature could satisfy 781, put that money to the counties, and then let's work on and stigma. And I don't want some ad campaign. I mean, I'm just looking for actual conversations to where we talk about, yes, my mother suffered from depression, or my my grandfather, whatever. I mean, we need to kind of be more open about it. Maybe that'll break it down. I don't know.
Something. We definitely need to get more mental health professionals in the state, and not just in the urban areas, but in the rural areas too. We just don't have it right now. And I'm not sure what's going to take to get that going comprehensively, what's going to get them to want to work here, but we need to make that happen, obviously.
I'm sure there are things like Medicaid rates staying up, but there's also, we have to bring in private care, because private insurance leads this so much. I mean, you have the state programs, but the private insurers are a big part of this too. So, but those two kind of things sort of boiled up this past week. And, I think the district attorney was brave, and I appreciate his candor, and I hope that him doing that kind of helps others. And the other big tragedy from last week was a shooting at McLain. It was in the parking lot of the McLain football game. I want to be very clear about that. And you wrote about it this weekend eloquently. I would suggest everyone read it, because the reactions have been all over the place.
Yeah.
Disappointing, maybe expected. So, but you made a good point in there. I mean, talk a little bit about your column this week.
Well, a couple of things that stuck out to me about this is I can understand why some parents might be, in light of the news of this kind of thing, might be a little reticent to go to the games and stuff like that. I get it. It's gun violence is not a small deal. Nobody wants to have their kid get hurt or something like that. But one of the points I want to make, and I really want people to think about, is who are the victims here? And one of the things that I remember learning, back in the 90s, through an experience that was happening at the Oklahoma City paper, the Oklahoman, after the bombing, was that you cannot treat victims as a statistic or just some sort of a name to be attached to a crime. You've got to understand who these people are. So I kind of did a real narrow look at that, and then a broader look at that. So, let's talk about the person who died in that thing. His name was Teron Yarbrough, a 17-year-old McLain High School student. Every indication that what we heard is that he's a good kid. This would be the kind of son you would want to have. He was in AP chemistry. He was a good student. He was a hard worker. He was in the VOTEC program, or career tech. And he worked outside of school. He was in a construction job, so he was making money and he was playing sports. I mean, talk about a go-getter. That's who died in the park just outside the stadium on September 30th. I guess that was last Friday. So we need to remember that kind of thing. These aren't just faceless whatever. These are people.
And making
broader,
yeah,
and you go to a broader look at this thing. The school, the community that's in that part of the city around McLain, they're victims of this too. They just lost a neighbor, a friend, somebody that they knew, saw in the hallways of school, maybe at church or something like that, at the workplace, at practice. He's not there anymore, and there's 3 other people who were injured in that shooting. They're going to have to deal with the trauma of being at the wrong place at the wrong time when somebody thought, the only way to resolve their dispute was with a gun. And, 1 of 4 fatal shootings that day, 1 of 2 in which deceased were teenagers. And I think the response to this is, yes, I get the shock value. I get the fear of the violence and stuff like that. But, the folks in that community are us. We're all Tulsans. We're all part of this larger community. And there's a piece of us that's hurting right now. And what I hope that does not happen, and what kind of already has started to happen, is that community is being ostracized. And I want to be careful when I'm saying that people are just like intentionally saying, everyone here, we cannot associate with you. That's not what people are saying, but that is in effect what's happening. Because you had one superintendent saying, as long as I hold this office, we're never going to go back there and play a game or do anything ever again. And then another superintendent saying, yeah, even if we're at a neutral site, we're not going to play the football game on Friday with these guys. That is, on one side, you can see that as a public safety concern from parents and students, but it is isolating a community that is already hurting. And that's kind of a double tragedy, I think. And this is a time where I think, we've got to find some way to rally around McLain.
Yeah, I saw
what
this
that looks like, but we need to do it.
I did see this morning, they came back to school and there were a lot of people in the community. There was even one of the Dr. Chris McNeil, who's a school board member at Union, was out holding signs, cheering them on.
That's great.
I loved that, because these kids, can you imagine? I mean, this kid was in AP chemistry. You're going back to school, you're in AP chemistry with him and he's not there. And you've got 2 superintendents in the state that are, saying they don't want anything to do with your school, even though we don't know much about the crime. The police are, not released a lot of information. We don't know. No one's been arrested at this point, but that wasn't on the field. Those kids on the field played hard. You had the band, the pom. I mean, I'm thinking I go to a high school football game almost every Friday, and it could have happened there. I mean, we're a nation of guns. We're a state of guns at this point, and that's part of this reality. And we've been writing for months now about the youth gun violence, and it's not relegated to one part of town. It really, it's been in South Tulsa, it's been BA. I mean, it's, the rural areas might think that they're protected, but I would caution against that. I mean, there are, suicides that happen, and there's always that possibility. What if? I mean, Chief Franklin had said that people should go to a football game and not worry about this. And I agree, but we should also be able to go to a movie, to an outdoor concert, dancing, school, to a doctor's appointment. And we're going to have to face the reality that we are not being safe with our weapons.
No.
And I don't know what's going to give, but I don't want to see McLain treated any differently than anyone else in mourning. So I remember we all came together after St. Francis. I think we can come together in this tragedy too. So I thought it was a really good piece this weekend, and I'm glad you wrote it. But, turning to the other things going on this week, the legislature is still in session. They've been in session since February. I guess when you're a lawmaker, you just never get a day off. But they've done a lot of good. I mean, $1 billion, over $1 billion has been expended in federal funds. It's not state money. The legislature, the lawmakers, sort of took this away from Governor Stitt because they didn't feel like the governor was working fast enough to get this money out. So they took it away from him, and they started dispersing this money. Maybe there was a hiccup, a kind of an embarrassing one, where they're picking on trans children again. And I'm not sure how that works when they were core group of people upset that OU Children's was giving some treatments to transgender children. Lots of misinformation about what that is. It's not surgery. It's not irreversible. But regardless, transgender children seems to be a trigger. And so they banned it. They made OU stop doing that in order to receive ARPA money, which I'm not sure how a state policy, regardless of state policy, can be attached to federal money. I'm not sure. I'm not an attorney, but that seems a little illogical to me. But outside that, a lot of things new medical facilities, healthcare, broadband, a lot of things are going to change. And then right at the end, stalemate. There's $95 million being held up in good projects. Projects like the Oasis food market, expanding into other food deserts. Another Food on the Move gets a new facility, all these good things, but it's being held up because somewhere someone's fighting over $2.8 million of that for the YWCA in Oklahoma City to expand its housing program for foster youth aging out of the system. No one knows why. The only connection is that the Senate President Pro Tem Greg Treat's wife is on the YWCA board there, but he said in a press conference that he didn't think that was it. So I'm going to assume it's something petty because still dominated by men. Sorry, but I don't know. It just seems like there's no reason not. So the House and the Senate are in the stalemate. They won't pass it. So $95 million in projects are in limbo right now until they can figure it out. And so we wrote an editorial saying, work it out. This is your job.
Yeah.
Almost had it. Oklahoma legislature.
It's not like we're talking about things that are like,
they're not
oh my gosh, this is going to end up in Senator Langford's pig book. These are things that are very, they're very related to what ARPA was for: recovery from the pandemic, recovery from the economic downturn of the pandemic. That's what it was. That's what these projects directly address in their own ways. And we're just sitting there on these things. And that's when you say that you're taking control of these things because you didn't like how slowly it was being rolled out by the governor's office. And then you do this. It's not a good look. It's not a good look.
No. And I was like, you were almost there, legislature. You almost got it. And then you live up to your reputation, I guess. So hopefully they will get this worked out and all of these good programs can be funded, because one of the things that was uncovered, and I read, I think it was Senator Chuck Hall from my hometown of Perry, but he had said that, he goes, one of the things that this uncovered was just how much need is in Oklahoma. The pandemic showed how many people were scraping by and they fell off the cliff. And so this really uncovered the true needs. And so moving forward, this is great federal money coming in. It ends. So we're going to have to figure out as a state how we're going to keep some of it going if we want to keep some of these going. So, that was something that I hope lawmakers really internalized, is just what our fellow Oklahomans are needing. But another good thing that we wrote about this week was Greenwood's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's taken like 15, 20 years.
Woo-hoo.
And the weird thing about that whole journey, watching this, them meaning the leaders in Greenwood, one of the reasons they had a hard time getting on there was because there weren't enough historic places. Because it had either been burned in the 1921 race massacre, or it had been torn down by urban renewal in the 60s. So the things that devastated the area were the reasons it was being kept off. And I just thought this whole time, like, how can they justify that? But, and to Senator Langford's credit, he did work on the federal end to push that on behalf of all the local leaders who there were several of them. So that was cool. And I hope that that brings us some national attention and people down to the Greenwood area.
I'm glad that we did not further the process of erasure by putting that off, because that's what you're looking at there. Is like, you don't have enough buildings, but the reason why you didn't have enough buildings is because 100 years ago, a bunch of them burned down, and then 40 years after that or whatever, they tore a bunch down more to build a highway and all that. That's erasure.
Yeah.
And hey,
well, and I'm still hoping we can move that highway. It's weird how we build our cities with a circle around downtown. Don't we want to it doesn't even make sense architecturally anymore to me. So I'm hoping my hope one day is I'll be alive to see that moved or somehow redesigned to where it's not kicking up gravel into the AME church.
Yeah,
be nice. Well, speaking of erasure, we got House Bill 1775, since we like erasing history in this state. People say it's not happening. It's happening. And that is an argument. People say, well, we should, you've been in meetings and talked to people with me, lawmakers and other policymakers that defend it, say, well, we shouldn't teach one race or gender is better than the other. Yeah. True.
Yeah.
But there's a whole other part of that law that's subjective and has that chilling effect, which is you're not going to teach anything that makes someone feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So our board, seeing how this whole thing has played out, seeing how it's really just a weapon for a very political state board of education, we're advocating to repeal it. But I don't know really how realistic that is. I would love to say, yes, we can all agree that this has been not the law we want.
Yeah.
So I'm being doubting Thomas here that it'll actually get repealed. Do you want to argue with me on that?
My thinking behind this is anytime you pass a law and then you start looking at what you intended to do and then what it actually did, the results are what matter. Okay. So do we have a rash of things happening in the state of Oklahoma where, white kids are going home to their parents crying, so, oh, I cannot stand being white. Look at all the things that we did. Come on. That's not happening. That's not happening. And, but if that's what is supposed to stop from happening, but what it actually is happening is just what you said. It's being used not even procedurally, just as a matter of, 1775 and we don't like you, so bam, there you go. We're gonna dock your accreditation.
It's used in the most. It's not. I don't even think the state board was even using it as the law allows, because it's supposed to be about teaching, and they're downgrading accreditation for one.
We already know that with the case with TPS, it's been demonstrated that whatever it was they say they did not do, that the evidence does not support the state ed board's decision on that matter. And it didn't matter. They did it anyway. They went ahead and gave him an accreditation with a warning or something like that, despite a lack of evidence that has been shown to them that they had no evidence.
Well, first they did.
Before that, they didn't even hear the evidence.
Yeah, they didn't hear the evidence first time.
They did it.
Yeah. So but here's the question. How likely is it to actually be repealed? Do you think that I don't know if there's enough lawmakers who really I think there's this fear of the other person doing something, like we even, it's not happening in my school because I love my school, but that place somewhere else in that scary big town, they're probably doing it there and we need to pass a law. And so how many lawmakers going to sign on?
Well, what's going to happen is if you are saying, yeah, we need to repeal it, they're going to say, oh, well, you just want CRT in schools.
Exactly.
Even though CRT has not been in schools.
Never been in schools.
That's a very convenient boogeyman for people to cite. And since that's the scary alphabet combination du jour right now, no one's going to touch that. It's kind of like a third rail. You just don't want to touch that thing or you're going to get shocked. And we've got a few issues like that. This one is for now. So I think personally, if you are serious about good policy, good results, you would say, yeah, this is not doing what it intended to do. It's actually harming classroom instruction. We need to ditch this or start over and do something different. But ideology, policy driven by ideologues is going to prevent that from happening, because no one wants to be primaried. No one wants to be seen as this way or that way. And that's just kind of how things are in our state political arena. So yeah, it's probably not very likely, but Osage Nation Congress, they were like, we should dump this thing. We don't think our history should be whitewashed. I'm glad that we as a board came to a decision to say, yep, we agree with that. It's bad policy. It needs to go. Whether folks are going to listen to us, I don't know. I hope they do, though.
What's interesting about the Osage Nation doing that was it was reported that a teacher in Dewey, a high school teacher, had donated a lot of copies of The Killers of the Flower Moon that would have been taught to the high school kids. Well, part of Dewey is in the Osage Nation, or the Osage Nation extends into to Dewey. I'm not sure how that, I know that they're connected, that there's an overlap in there. And so I imagine there are Osage citizens who are students who are not allowed to read this story. They know, but how weird is that? That that the chilling effect is that a teacher is scared that she's going to violate House Bill 1775, teaching their history to them. And that's, it's just this weird. So I'm kind of thinking the Osage Nation Congress is right, that this is not how it should be. But yet, we see how the state board, and now we have, the Secretary of Education wants to pull credentials of teachers that have, he disagrees politically with. So, that he considers woke, and if he becomes a new state superintendent, then that would be in his authority to pull credentials. So there's a real fear going around that is not helping our teacher shortage. I'll say that. And I think a lot of experienced teachers are wondering why. So, we have to get serious about what we want in our education system. And if we don't repeal 1775, it ought to be seriously gutted and start over. If you really want to have something on the books that says, we shouldn't discriminate, which we have lots of different protections for that, then okay, but let's not try to legislate feelings, because that's where we're getting in trouble. So, but anyway, so we are in the middle of campaign season, and we got about a month left.
Yep.
I hope people are doing their homework. One of the cool things that we started doing last week, the rollout was a little clunky on our end. We've got it fixed. We have dueling op-eds. So taking the governor's candidate, the incumbent governor, Kevin Stitt, and state superintendent, Joy Hoffmeister, challenging him. So there's a writer for each campaign, each candidate, and on a theme each week on why my chosen candidate is best for education, why my chosen candidate is best for the economy. That's what we're going to focus on this weekend. And last week was about education, and we had, so if you missed it, we had writing for Kevin Stitt, Christy Rawlings, who's a Tulsa parent activist, and for Hoffmeister, the Jinx school board member, Terry Keeling, wrote for her, which was interesting because she's running as a Democrat and he's conservative. So it's kind of an interesting.
She's a Republican, that's right.
Yeah. Well, Joy did change her registration to be a Republican. So for this week, this Sunday, the op-eds are written by Sean Copeland, who's the chairman and CEO of Regent Bank and served in the state administration, writing about why he believes it is best for the economy. And then Erica Lucas, who's I believe she's out of Oklahoma City, but has a lot of experience in business. I've seen her name as a motivational speaker, and she does a lot of work around women's networking and business. But she's writing for for Joy Hoffmeister arguing her point. So next week we'll examine healthcare, and then the week after that is an overall endorsement by different writers. So it's kind of interesting. I've enjoyed looking at the contrast between the two and how two different perspectives on the same issue pan out. So check that out this weekend.
It's neat. We got a real race.
Yes. Well, we have them up online right now, and we have last week's up as well. So hopefully people can kind of, in this whole preparation and knowing who to vote for, if you're really wanting to dig in, I hope people are doing some reading and not just talking points. So that's why we do this, what we do. So anyway, any last words, Bob Doucette?
Well, I'm going to throw this out there just for fun, because I know this weekend, huge football weekend, OU Texas. I'm going to advise people to take the advice I have told myself. If your team loses, do not let it ruin your day.
I think that should be maybe reminded every weekend.
Yes. So I was last weekend was a bad football weekend for me. Just almost every team that I wanted to win did not win, and my favorite team found a way to lose to one of our bitterest rivals. But it's like, you know what? Don't let it ruin your day. Just turn it off, move on, do something else. Enjoy the day, whatever. So maybe the Sooners pull it out.
Are you much of a baseball fan? Did you watch the Yankees?
Yeah, they kept throwing in the whole thing with Aaron Judge trying to get 62, and he didn't get it that day. It was kind of annoying in some ways because, hey, I'm totally stoked for Aaron Judge. He's a very cool dude. He's a great player. He makes every other player on the diamond look like a child when he steps up to bat. It's just humorous to me how big he is. But I also realized that this was very much a ESPN, Fox Sports, whatever manufactured chase, because he broke the AL record.
Heart to some people. The Yankees fans have been freaking out all week. You know what? I'm going to bring Kevin Canfield on here.
73.
Kevin Canfield will have some strong words for you. So
sorry, man. The numbers are the numbers, man. 73 is the record.
Freakishly, baseball seems to be the favorite pastime to talk about in the newsroom. So, and you might want to keep that to yourself. Your whole thing. Well,
I'll wear that on my chest.
I have a very different life. I'm having about 20 high school pom girls come to my house tomorrow to get ready before a high school football game. So it's like the hurricane that comes in and takes over. And there's lots of hairspray and lotions and things. And then they leave. And I have a lot less food and a different looking house. So it's fun. So that's my world. And once I survive it, I can take a breather. So, and I tell my son and my husband, just leave, just be gone, come back later. And they usually do. So anyway, I hope everyone has a good weekend, and we will be back next week.
Adios.